Welcome back to another guide. Today we're going to be talking about Magicka ability progression from the immortal world all the way to voidbreak, wholeness, perfection, and finally nirvana. At first, the only thing you need are the stages to unlock the abilities, citrine and ability points. These are very basic resources. Citrine, you gotta do a lot of content daily to get it, but it's pretty simple, and the amount you can get, it's kind of the same being a spender or free to play. It's pretty much the same, so it's a pretty fair system as far as everything goes in the game. Early on, you want to upgrade and unlock all the abilities you can. Maybe these two are exceptions, they only go up to level 20, so it's going to be pretty easy to max out either way, but eventually you will have these 6 abilities unlocked and you want to be using all of them. You don't have many options, so that's what you're going to stick with until you reach incarnation and you can start considering investing in these more expensive abilities. This is the point where you got to start considering what abilities you want to get, and that's where the heavy investment starts to be a thing. These ones are pretty easy, they are very inconsequential in terms of resources, but that's where you gotta make a decision and do your research properly if you want to have an optimized build. Anyway, what we usually get is Blizzard because it's a cheap ability, has low cooldown, good damage, and it's AoE, and it also makes the enemy unable to get buffs, which is a very powerful effect. So now all around really good ability, especially with its damage and cooldown. But the extra effect is also very nice. That's your first option usually. You could also go for Rake Trigrams, but the issue with this ability here, despite being really nice, it inflicts blind, has low cooldown, damage is okay, hits 4 enemy targets. It's pretty cool. However, there's a big issue here is that the blind effect, it can no longer affect enemies past the immortal world. So that's a wasted part of the ability, which was a big deal. It's pretty good for Pandemonium and for the Mortal World Tower. What is the name? Spire? Demon Spire? It's really good there, makes the enemies blind. It's a good defensive ability, very low cooldown, so you are consistently making enemies blind. It's really nice, very good. However, it's no longer effective against players once you reach a void break because of Immortal's Will, which is a buff that makes you immune to crowd control effects from Mortal World abilities. So things like the blind from this, the paralysis from Phantasm, the paralysis from Paralysis Charm, they won't be effective against players anymore if they have maxed out Immortal's Will, which is something that everyone should do as soon as they can. Then you have Hellfire, which is probably the worst ability in the Magicka tree. Literally no one uses this, it's really bad. The cooldown is kinda okay, hits 3 enemy targets, but the damage is kinda bad, and the effect is not very good. It could be worse, but it's not that good, like 10% extra M damage taken, alright. But then you have M hit reduction here at level 80, like this is horrible. No one cares about this. It's already bad because it only affects half of the player base, like Corporeal players and now Sword players don't need M hit, so you're not even debuffing them. It's irrelevant. And then if you're fighting against a Magicka, and that's not a good enough reason to pick this up. And then there's the final reason that makes it even worse is the requirements. The problem with these abilities here is that they require you to invest into abilities of a different path. So for instance, in order for me to simply unlock this, to have it at level 1 and being able to use it, I will need to go to the Corporea tree. I will need to get this to level 20, I would need to get this to level 30, and I would need to get this to level 45, and finally I would need to get God's Fall to level 65. Then I would finally be able to use the Hellfire ability, which is pretty bad, I would say. So the much better option here is go for Phantasm. However, it's still pretty expensive. It's the same requirement. I need to reach level 65 in God's Fall or whatever sword he has here, which is a sword glare and um, Mirai sword. You need to get level 65 in one of these. So what we do is completely ignore a second ability. We don't do that. By the time you get these abilities at a high level, you are already pretty fine, almost reaching void break, so it's not really a concern. So you reach void break, now you have the spiritual world abilities, and a lot of new game systems are unlocked for you. One of them is laws, and laws is really important for unlocking abilities uh, because of the cosmic laws. Cosmic laws are the requirement to unlock these abilities here. Let me go to Corporea. For instance, this one requires me to unlock Thunder Law at G3. And in order to unlock these laws, usually I need a certain law level. So investing in your garden, your fruits will make you get laws faster, which means you gain access to cosmic laws earlier, and that's what makes you unlock these spiritual world abilities here. So it's a core aspect of your character. This is also massive resource stamp from law fruits, so you gotta keep your garden well, but also from the citrine aspect later on down the road. So yeah, even if you only care about PvE, let's say, you don't care about PvP, laws are not a big deal for you. They actually are, because you are unable to use these abilities here if you don't have certain law levels. For instance, I need Fausto's Law G3 here, which requires 10,000 laws, which is maxed out. So G2 completed. So I'm unable to use this ability until I have reached 10,000 laws, and that's going to take a while. So yeah, very important part of getting new abilities. I'm saying this in this video because it's related to abilities, but yeah, you should be researching and learning about laws as well. It's a really important part of your character and your progression. Anyway, getting back to the ability progression here. Tonitros is pretty nice, hits 3 enemies, good cooldown, it makes them take more M damage. I said that it wasn't that good, but that's considering the ability you're getting back there. It's very expensive. So yeah, here it's a pretty cheap ability, hits 3 targets and good cooldown. It's completely fine here in this ability. And then it makes them less likely to dodge your attacks, which is not that good, but at least works on everyone. Because the enemies either corporeal or Magicka, they're gonna have A evasion, so yeah, it makes you more likely to hit them. It's kind of nice. And then you make Scorch last even longer, which makes this a really good ability PvE wise as well, because this M damage taken plus 10%, it's gonna last even longer, another 2 seconds here. You may see that the numbers are a bit skewed here. Instead of 10%, it's 9.5. Instead of 2 seconds, it's 1.9. And that's because of stage penalties. As you progress through stages here and you start using older abilities like this one, and this is from voidbreak, and I'm in nirvana. So they're going to start getting weaker. They're going to be nerfed. Same thing for the Mortal World abilities and shields. For instance, this one is 15% less effective, and if we go to the paralysis charm here, you're gonna notice that it's 20% less effective. And this affects both your chance to hit, but as well as your crowd control duration. This is originally 90% for 3 seconds, which means that as you progress, these older abilities will be less effective, but sometimes they're still useful enough so you can keep using them despite these nerfs. Anyway, then you're gonna have Tonitros, and after you unlock these cosmic laws here, you're gonna be able to get both Tonitros Wood and Tonitros Metal. Tonitros Metal is really good. It's the paralysis charm of the spiritual world, a really reliable stun, which also deals good damage, makes the enemy less likely to dodge your attacks, which is always welcome. Not the best buff in the world, but yeah, it at least works for you, useful. And it also has a relatively low cooldown. It's not as low as Paralysis Charm, which is like 13 seconds, but 23 is still acceptable. It's in the middle ground of the ability cooldowns. So yeah, these two are really nice and very solid options for your next two abilities once you reach Void Break. So your ability setup would be looking like this. You would have Tonitrus Metal, Tonitrus, then you would go into Mortal World, equip Blizzard, your two ability shields here because they're simply better than using just trigrams, more reliable. They don't have a cap, they only depend on your mana pool, and they usually have lower cooldown as well. So go for the ability shields. This makes us have 4 abilities, 5. And lastly, you're going to use Pyrokinesis because it's good single target DPS. The damage is pretty nice, makes them take extra M damage as well, so yeah, really good DPS skill. Eventually you're going to get rid of it, but for now it's serviceable. And you also have the option here, as I said before, you would be maxing these ones out and getting all of you can for the Mortal World abilities. You're going to be staying there for a while, so you want to be competitive. Which means that you're spending extra citrine here, this resource, to get these abilities maxed out. So as you stop using them, I'm no longer using Chi Blast, I'm no longer using Third Eye. The citrine I invested in these abilities, it's no longer being used, which may make you want to reset your abilities, and I will get into that in a minute. Now, after you get your Tonitrus, you have your full setup for early void break. You have to start checking how much citrine you have and if you can afford to go for phantasm. This is the moment you will be saving citrine and trying to reach a certain threshold in order to afford this ability at a high enough level that it's actually good. So, what you want to do is click reset here. You're going to check how much you have in this field, which means all the citrine you have invested in your character. And then you're going to go into your sect and sect shop here. So you can check how much citrine you have available to use. So you're going to sum this one plus the amount you have from reset, and that's how much total citrine you have. You want to have around 170,000 citrine in order to be able to afford phantasm. If you don't have at least that much, it means that you either gonna be unable to level these abilities here. If you have very little citrine, you're not even close. You won't even be able to get these guys to level 65, 45, or you're not going to be able to get Phantasm at a high enough level that makes it a good ability. Especially at level 60, which increases its DPS by 50%. It usually attacks 2 times, and adding another one is 50% more damage. That is massive. And then at level 80, you inflict paralysis, but if you are at void break already, people are going to be immune to this, so this bonus here just does nothing for you PvP wise. It's going to be useful against PvE enemies. They will never be immune to crowd control regardless of stage, but yeah, against other players it won't be useful. Anyway, you want to be sure that you have enough citrine for this, and that's when you might consider resetting your abilities for that. If I maxed out all these abilities here, and I was making use of them at Mortal World, but now I want to switch to my new Void Break setup, it would be helpful if I reset my abilities to get some extra citrine that I wasted in these ones. It won't be a lot, it doesn't take a lot of citrine to max these things out here, but it would definitely be something else you can do to make the process faster. I would go against it. Usually it's 500 Fatium for a reset. You do get one free reset with Cosmic Claws, which is when you unlock this and then you go into Cosmics. You do get a free reset here. It usually costs 1,000, but you do once for free. And this thing will also reset your abilities, not only your Cosmic Laws, but also your abilities. I would also say that you should save this. There are later points in the game where you may want to rearrange your skills, get new abilities, and that would be more helpful than doing it as a fresh Void Break player that just is trying to make enough to get a Phantasm. But if you want to do that, if you have the Fatium you think you can afford, then sure, just make sure to calculate if you have enough. And you can do that by checking a spreadsheet that I will have linked in the description of this video that has the citrine cost for every ability at every level, and you just add them up and see how much you actually need to do what you want. If you want to unlock Phantasm, if you want to reset your abilities, how much that will cost you, and then you can check how much you actually have and if that's possible to do. So, you got your Phantasm, you have your Blizzard, you have your Shields, you have your Tonitrus Metal, you got rid of Pyrokinesis for Phantasm. It's all good. You have a really good build now. You are pretty nice at voidbreak. The next upgrade you might want is going for Dragon Taming Water. And this is it's not something that everyone does. Some people prefer the Windwalker ability because of the immunity it provides, but Dragon Taming Water is also a good option. The main advantage of Dragon Taming Water is that it gives you immunity. Not immunity, sorry, it gives you Purify. It removes negative effects from your character, and that's a very valuable thing. You want to remove debuffs from your character to make you perform better. Sometimes the enemy really needs some debuffs to be inflicted in you so they can deal extra damage, and by having something like Dragon Taming Water or the Demon Faith Flask, you're actually nullifying that, you're denying that ability from them. So yeah, pretty good ability here. The advancement is not the best. Magic defense, it only works against one type of player, and it lasts 3 seconds, which is okay, but yeah, it's not the best. If you go here to the Windwalker, you will see that it gives you immunity to debuffs, which is a very, very, very good effect. It makes you immune to debuff, so yeah, you won't have your damage reduced, you won't have your chance to hit reduced, it won't make you take extra damage. For these 1.5 seconds and up to 3 seconds, if I level it to plus 10, the enemy simply won't be able to inflict debuffs to me, which is really nice. So that's something you also want to take into consideration later on as you get more advancement guides, which are this item here. You might start thinking about which abilities you want to improve with it. Usually people tell players to upgrade your damage abilities all the way up to plus 5, make all your damage abilities plus 5, and then start investing in shields, and then you go back to your damage ability. That's definitely a viable option, but I would say that it's also pretty good to get at least plus 5 in your shield, so you are immune to debuffs. That is if you're using Windwalker. If you're not using Windwalker, the other options are not as good in terms of advancements, and you could be using it for your damage abilities as well. It's not worth to invest in them in terms of advancements. So, you have your abilities here, you got your Dragon Taming Water, or not, but it's still a pretty good option. Then you reach Wholeness, and you have Godslayer. Base godslayer is not very good. It inflicts poison in the enemy, deals some damage per second, and then the extra effect is making them lose movement speed, which is not useful at all for duels, for PvP. The only moment where this might be good is at Apex, when you want people to not run away from you, and a little bit of PvE in terms of pandemonium, I guess. The enemy will move slower, so it's easier to kite them, I think. It's definitely an alternative, but not the best ability. I wouldn't invest too many levels here. I would just do enough to unlock the next abilities later on, but not more than that. Then you have Godslayer Fire, which is a really good ability. Just keep in mind that it requires a certain level of Cosmic Law, like this one as well. But if you get it, it's pretty nice. It makes you deal extra damage against other players. And most importantly, it has 90% chance of inflicting blind for 2 seconds. This is really good. It's a very powerful effect, which will boost your survivability by a lot. Missing an entire ability, it's like nullifying it. It doesn't do anything against your character. They wasted their cooldown, they wasted their mana, they wasted their cast time casting the ability. So that's really, really, really good. And the advancement is pretty alright as well. The damage scaling is good, extra 48% damage. So this would be the next ability you get, and ideally you would either do one of these two things. You would drop one of your ability shields and keep only one, or you would drop one of your DPS abilities. So we'll actually make this so it's easier for you to see. Yeah, let's do that. So this was my ability setup for voidbreak, right? Got this guy, got this guy. Gonna get my shields. I got blizzard, and let's pretend that this is phantasm. I'm no longer using phantasm, but it's a really good ability that you could actually use all the way to nirvana. The reason I'm not using it is because I wanted to try different things, and because I don't like the fact that Phantasm only deals damage. It doesn't have any sort of effect, it doesn't inflict debuffs, it doesn't give me buffs. I don't really like that type of ability. I think it's too simple and it wouldn't be doing enough for my character. But it's definitely a really good ability. Even at Nirvana, it will be consistent in terms of damage. The scaling is still pretty good, even with the 10% stage penalty. And you're not making a mistake if you keep using Phantasm all the way to Nirvana. But let's pretend it is Phantasm here because I can't unlock it. So the next thing I would do here for my abilities would be dropping one of the shields, because at this point I would also be either would have already unlocked Flask, or I would soon unlock it, which is a really good relic shield that removes debuffs, can be used while you are stunned, and it has a good shield cap. It's higher than trigrams, so it would be a good substitute for my other ability shield. But if you want to remain defensive, you want to still have your two ability shields, you can definitely remove Tonitrus and have your godslayer fire here. And then you get back to two shields. That would be your setup. This is Phantasm, don't forget that. So the next thing that would be is unlocking Shimmer. Shimmer unlocks at wholeness as well, and it's a really good damage ability. It has good scaling. The cooldown is not the best, but still decent, and it makes the enemy have less crit res, which is nice. But the most important part here is that it has silence. It makes the enemy unable to cast abilities for 2 seconds, and that's really powerful. Although it's kind of rare to cause this debuff in the enemy, when it happens, it's pretty good. And then it also has 90% chance of removing one debuff, which is kind of nice. It's okay. It can mess up your enemy. It's good. It's a decent effect. So yeah, really good ability overall. So what I would do again, remove one ability shield. I would get rid of a spiritual wall, for instance, and use Shimmer here. Very nice. Then eventually, you're gonna unlock Shimmer Earth and Shimmer Fire. Usually, if you are a free-to-play player, you won't be unlocking these two before having Cardinal Thunder. However, Cardinal Thunder is a niche pick. It's not very common, not everyone uses it, and that's because the things it do are not that good, I would say. They are okay, but not the best. It gives you crit res. It's a defensive thing. It makes them lose movement speed, which is always a joke, not useful. And then it removes one negative effect, which, okay, yeah, it removes one buff. Nice. But in terms of damage and cooldown, it hits 3 enemy targets, but the damage is not the best, and the cooldown is in the mid tier. So compared to Shimmer here, which has better damage, it does better debuffs, this would clearly be the superior option. Phantasm still does better in terms of DPS. Godslayer Fire has the blind effect, which is really nice, and the DPS is also okay. So this would either go instead of Blizzard, which I don't really see a reason to do that, or would go instead of Tonithros Metal, which can definitely be an alternative here. So if you want to drop your stun, which already has a stage penalty, I think. I'm not sure, but probably would have 5% stage penalty. It's not a lot, but definitely going against you. You can totally do that. You won't be breaking your character if you get rid of the stun and add another damage ability, especially since it hits 3 targets. It's kinda nice. But yeah, that's your alternative here. And then next up, you would be having Shimmer Earth and Shimmer Fire. I won't be talking about the negatives here, but rather the things that people usually go for. So I skipped godslayer Water. I'm gonna skip Shimmer Fire. Just gonna talk briefly about it, actually. Yeah, it gives you increased duration of buffs, which is horrible. Like your buff lasts 3 seconds. Now add 15% of that. That's like a 0.45 extra seconds. It's bad. It doesn't do anything. And that's for buffs you already have or you're about to get, which lasts very little. So yeah, pretty much useless. Then you remove Diabolic Flame and enhancement effects. This is extremely niche. It will almost never happen. Yeah, no. Just no. And damage, since it's an AoE ability, hits more than one enemy target, it's not gonna be the best. It's gonna give you 15% crit, which is kinda okay, and the cooldown is mid-tier, so there's not really many things going for this ability. It's not the best one. I really don't see a reason to pick this instead of something else. For Godslayer Water, it's also kind of bad. It gives you ability damage reduction, which is okay. Good defensive ability, low cooldown, okay. But the effects it does is increase the duration for 5 seconds, which gives you greater uptime, gives you crit res, and some extra damage. The problem here is that it's an AoE ability, so first of all, it's not gonna have the best single target DPS, so it's not as good for duels, but usually that's compensate by having good effects and debuffs. But it doesn't do that either. It gives you 16% crit res and extra damage. So it doesn't do that well against a single target, and if it's for PvE, you just have better options. You already have other abilities unlocked, so it would be kind of a waste of citrine doing this just for PvE. So that's why we go for Godslayer Fire and Shimmer Earth here. Now talking about Shimmer Earth, what makes it really good is that it gives you 50% chance of ignoring an ability attack. That is extremely powerful. It makes you nullify the attack from your enemy. And the interesting thing is that it lasts 3 seconds, so it doesn't have a limit. So if you get lucky, you can ignore even 2 or 3 abilities, which is very nice. There's also the curse effect, which makes the enemy unable to get any buffs for 3 seconds, which is massive. And it's an AoE ability, but the damage is kinda good. Oh, it also removes 1 buff. 1 debuff from your character. So it both benefits you from removing a buff and also makes the enemy unable to get buffs while also giving you a really good defensive effect with 50% chance of ignoring attacks. And the damage is kinda okay. It could be better, it's not a single target ability, but it's kind of okay. The advancements are kinda okay too. 40% damage at +5, then it goes all the way to +80%. So yeah, overall nice ability. And what you would do for this is get rid of Cardinal Thunder and add your Shimmer Earth. By this point you could start also considering dropping the Blizzard ability. It's still pretty good still. It deals nice damage. The cooldown is still the same. It's still working well. But you can definitely choose to keep an extra ability shield or invest into Deathfire later on, or even keep your Cardinal Thunder here. But Blizzard still beats it. It's still better, I think. But it's an option. You can definitely drop your Blizzard. Maybe you feel like you want another stand and you got all these other abilities. If that's what you need, it works. It's definitely viable. But I would say that you finally drop this one for the Cardinal Thunders eventually, which is at 8,000 loss. This will probably happen at the end of Perfection or at the start of Nirvana if you're not a big spender or if you don't have shears. But yeah, this thing here is pretty nice, these two abilities. It's AoE, the damage is not the highest, 630% is definitely on the lower end, but it makes the enemy take 12% extra damage. It makes you deal crit more likely, you're more likely to do crit, and it also makes them deal 12% less damage against players, which is also pretty good. So it's a defensive and offensive buff with a mid-tier cooldown. It's definitely a good ability in terms of what it provides to your character. In terms of DPS, it could be better, but the interesting thing here is that it also has good advancements, 63.5% extra damage at plus 10, 31% at plus 5. So yeah, that's also pretty good. And then you have Cardinal Thunder Earth, which hits 2 enemy targets for really good damage, 880%, at 21% cooldown. It's kind of nice. It gives you the Purify ability, which removes debuffs, and it also makes you take less damage and deal more damage with an M attack buff. These two are pretty good. Extra M attack could be better, it could do something else, but yeah, for these two reasons here is really good, and this is just a bonus, an extra. The damage is still really good. And that's just advancement plus 5 at plus 10, it does 97%, which is massive. So what you want to be doing here is eventually get rid of Blizzard, so you can slot in your Cardinal Thunder, and finally you can consider either dropping Phantasm, and for that you would not pick a Shimmer Metal maybe, or you would drop your Windwalker and use just ability shields, but I'm really against this idea because relic shields are usually weaker, but you could definitely try. You just need the trigrams to test it out and duel people, see if it works for you. It's an option, but I would say to keep one ability shield and eventually get rid of Phantasm. It still works, but you will need to sacrifice something in order to use it. You would either get rid of one of your shimmers, maybe get rid of godslayer fire, but the blind effect is still pretty useful. So what I'm actually doing right now is using both Cardinal Thunders, both Shimmers, and Godslayer with Windwalker. This is my current ability setup for Nirvana. This is based on your law, so you may reach Nirvana, get your Deathfire ability unlocked, but not the Cardinal Thunders because your laws are not at 8,000 yet. But yeah, you gotta keep checking what you have available to you and invest your citrine accordingly. As a side note, I want to reinforce that farming citrine is very important at every stage of the game. I have 795,000 invested here, and almost none of it is wasted. I have some abilities here that I'm not using, like Tonitros and my shields, but that aside, everything is going into the build. They get pretty expensive later on, so definitely don't be lazy in terms of farming citrine. Always do that every week. Do your mining, participate in sect content, do your sect duel, kill the beast every time it opens up. Always do that so you can have enough resources to upgrade your abilities. Later on, the plan is to use one of these death fires here, which will unlock a 10k loss. But here's the funny thing. Unless you're an expander and you have good law progress, like if you were nearly 10k now at Nirvana, you won't be able to use these ones. I mean, you will be able to use them, but it won't be a good idea. And the reason is that if you complete Nirvana and the Celestial Gate opens for the Immortal world, which is the new content, you won't be using any of these abilities anymore. None of this will be useful. You will have a completely new set of abilities to use, and these ones will be discarded later on. They are no longer the best options you can have. So ironically, you might not even have to use these abilities before even unlocking them. So that's kind of funny how the low progress works and how slow it is if you're not a spender. But yeah, this is what I would be using here at Nirvana. I think we talked about all the relevant abilities here and your Immortal World progression. There's definitely room for skill expression here. You can decide what you want to use. I definitely recommend you to test things out. It's 500 Fatium to reset your ability, so it's kind of expensive, but make sure to, once you have some leftover citrine, you already upgraded your things and you want to test something out and you plan to reset later, do test new abilities, see what works for you. Sometimes you want to drop one of the ability shields, sometimes you want to use two of them. You gotta do these different ability orders and setups, test against your friends, find some good sparring partner that is equally as strong as you so you can see what works and what does not. This is a very important part of the game, seeing what works for your character, your current account progression, and it's definitely fun to find new ability setups that are good. This is definitely one of the most enjoyable parts of the game, and I do recommend trying things out for yourself, seeing what abilities are good, and finding the best combination for you. Pretty much that's what I'm trying to say here. But yeah, I hope this was helpful for you in your journey, and we'll be talking about laws and how to unlock abilities in a different video. But this was mostly for what abilities you want to be considering once you progress through the game. That's about it, and good luck.